Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to the January 10th meeting of the City of Brentwood Planning and Zoning Commission. If you'll please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Sherry Bilderbeck,
Here.
Michael Daming,
Here.
Jennifer Hansen.
Here.
Mark Favaza,
Here.
Michael Hart,
Here.
Rebecca Jacobs.
Here.
Clint Lewis. Here. Paul Moran,
Here.
Hart Nelson.
Here.
John Number is here. Alicia Shirley,
Here.
Tom Schiffley. Here. We have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Nuremberger. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the December 13th meeting. Are there any revisions to said minutes? Seeing none, they'll stand as approved by acclamation. We have no matters under old business. We have one item under new business, which is a series of text amendments to Chapter 400. Ms. Kirkemeyer, can you please present on those text amendments?
Yes, thank you. Good evening. So the text amendment that we have for tonight is a city-initiated text amendment. And the text amendments all involve clarifying our existing zoning code to prohibit short-term rentals in Brentwood. So short-term rentals is generally defined as a situation where it's a rental for less than 30 days, and it could either be a room that someone would rent out, it could be the entire house, and it comes under different terms and so forth. So one of the more important things we had to do with the text amendments was even just establish a definition for short-term rental. So it's kind of a newer phenomena. It's definitely been increasing in popularity over the last few years. So as I said, it's just a clarification. Right now, short-term rentals are not permitted in Brentwood. And the reason being is because there are still sections of the existing code that talks about prohibition of tourist homes, and again, things that are kind of other names but kind of mean the same thing. And then secondly, short-term rentals would not be able to comply with our occupancy permit program for the city. So if anybody had ever called to inquire about a short-term rental, we told them they weren't allowed in the city of Brentwood. But we've been having, over especially the course of the last year, a few more people probably saying they suspect maybe short-term rentals in their neighborhood or something, or they saw something online, one of the websites, for instance. So what we had decided to do kind of was our strategy. We first took this to the Public Works Committee, and we explained the Public Works Committee is a subcommittee of the Board of Aldermen, and we explained to them that short-term rentals were not currently permitted in the city of Brentwood. What was the position? Do you think of the board? Would anything really change? And we had direction from the Public Works Committee back in November that we should keep the prohibition of short-term rentals in Brentwood. So the direction to staff was to come up with the text amendments to make that very clear in our code. And then because it's an amendment to Chapter 400, which is then reviewable by the Planning and Zoning Commission, that's how this got before you tonight. So again, the city's position with short-term rentals hasn't changed. What this text amendment does is, first of all, as I said, it creates a definition for short-term rental. And then secondly, in all the residential zoning districts, whether single-family, attached single-family, or multifamily, it is, an amendment was proposed to make it clear again that short-term rentals aren't permitted in those districts. We also looked at the home occupation section that's in Chapter 400. The home occupation included what I said, like prohibition that tourist homes and things of that nature were not permitted in as seen as a home occupation. And then finally, we also reviewed the occupancy permit section in the back of Chapter 400 and stated it there as well. So this is before you tonight. Oh, and I did want to make mention then too, after we had put the text amendments together, started to think about the urban development district. So the UD district does allow residential units as well. So two of our primary residential areas, which includes the villas and Hanley Station, are zone UD. So this, the text amendments also include the prohibition in the UD district as well. So that's pretty well where we're at with things. And again, we were directed from Public Works Committee to bring this before the P&Z. So I can take any questions or.
Questions from commissioners. Ms. Hanson.
Thank you. I have a number of questions. Who thought of this first? Was it Public Works, or the staff thought of it and brought it to Public Works?
So again, the city's position hadn't changed, but when we started to get more inquiries about short-term rentals and, again, suspicion that maybe one was operating, that was brought up at a Public Works Committee. Actually, the committee brought that up. And so then I was asked to speak about it, and do we allow these? And no, we don't. So then I went through, why we don't permit them. And then they thought if there was any problem, if it wasn't clear, that maybe we should consider these text amendments.
What is a tourist house?
I don't really know. We don't have a tourist home, for instance, defined in the definition section, but yet it shows up as a home occupation. But I would say, a tourist home, again, I don't really know. I've actually haven't heard that term before, so I don't know if it would be
Youth
more
hostel.
like.
That's what they call them in Europe, is a youth hostel.
So, what exactly prohibits short-term rental right now? What was it? It's an occupancy issue, that it's not owner
That
occupied?
is one,
Okay.
but then also it's just not permitted in any of our districts. So you don't see it listed as either a permitted by right or a conditional use permit. But also, when you start to pick up threads again, like it's not permissible as a home occupation, I would say then you have to kind of view what is the intent of your zoning code. So with having those other prohibitions of those types of uses, I would say that's, where we came from, is that their position is that they're not permissible.
So it's not expressly permitted, but is it expressly excluded under the current code?
I don't know. So I'm trying to think how those two would apply. Expressly prohibited, and then what was the other one that you said?
Expressly prohibited.
Okay.
We said it's not permitted, so I wanted to know if it was expressly, like if there was
Now it
something
would be.
expressed.
I mean, definitely if you read through the code, that's what this does.
I'm looking at it like, okay, if you permit something, you are writing down, you are expressly stating that something is permitted. So the absence of something being permitted, is that why you're saying it's excluded, or is there something expressly in there? I mean, is it just a read of like the occupancy issue that says it's not permitted, or is there something in there that has more teeth?
Well, I would say I would add that as well, is that if it's not, if it's not stated in there, then it is prohibited. But again, we're having this conversation because it's not clear, really.
Right.
So that is what we're trying to do, is make sure it is clear.
Yes. Okay, so, and why don't we want short-term rentals in Brentwood? Take me through the Public Works Subcommittee.
Sure. So the general discussion would have been that they didn't feel like it was really appropriate for the neighborhoods, because obviously whoever occupies that house is going to be changing. It's more of a transient nature. I think most of them probably felt it's kind of the NIMBY thing, like, would I want to have a short-term rental next to my house? And for the most part, I don't think they thought it would help property values, the safety, security factor, for sure. The other thing, I think they felt like it was somewhat unfair to hotels. I mean, we do have places in Brentwood that if you're just here visiting, we have places you can stay. They also pay taxes. Right now, it's been kind of up in the air how and if Airbnbs and those types of short-term rentals can actually be taxed. So that's really kind of more of the multitude of reasons, I would say.
Who was on the Public Works Subcommittee? I'm sorry, I don't know.
Sure. It's Alderman Lockmiller, and we have Alderman Dimmitt, Alderman Leahy, and Alderman Waggy,
Okay.
those four.
And just procedurally, because I'm not sure I understand, take me through how the Public Works Subcommittee gets us here and what happens if we approve this. So, I mean, I'm not understanding whether this is a done deal that,
No, so if you look at the beginning of our chapter 400, it talks about where can text amendments originate. And so they certainly can originate from any elected or appointed official. So that's why, I definitely wanted to make this clear that this was a city initiated to bring this forward. So it came through the elected officials.
okay. And then our task today is to do what exactly?
So the task would be to review the proposed text amendments and just either take action on it and find either recommendation in favor or not favor, and forward it on to the Board of Aldermen for consideration. There would be, since it is a text amendment, there will be a public hearing, but the public hearing will happen at the Board of Aldermen level.
Let's say a text amendment isn't passed, or even if it is passed, let's say like suddenly it gets to the alderman and they say it's a no-go. I mean, is there any sort of opposite sense that we could, that based on, the pieces you guys have put together, saying that we think that they're not expressly permitted, yet not expressly prohibited, that we might look at short-term rentals, or is this just a kind of a citywide thought that regardless of how the language works, we don't want this here?
I would say it's the latter. And then I would also say what would happen tonight, even if it would, this text amendment would be found not to have a favorable recommendation, it's still going to move to the Board of Aldermen. It would just not have a favorable recommendation.
One final question. I know, and I'll comment before that, but I know, for instance, Clayton, not everybody and their mom, but the whole short-term rental scheme seems to work there. And I don't think there's anything prohibiting it. In fact, I think that they're trying to incubate it and see how it works. When I looked through the paperwork, the only thing I saw was Maplewood, which didn't necessarily have a
correct.
prohibition, but clarified some rules. And I think you said Ellisville maybe, or Baldwin, something out there. So where's the precedent? From what other municipalities is there a precedent to shut down
So
short-term
there
rentals?
definitely is a handful that I would say, and where I'm getting this from is Stephanie Carr, our land use attorney, helped me with these amendments. So she works for various municipalities and also has kind of been following this industry, if you will. So she said that we would be about the fifth or sixth in the St. Louis region area to strengthen an outright prohibition of them. I'm not sure about Ellisville. I apologize for that. Maplewood, though, right next door to us, does have an ordinance on the books. They've had it there since 2015, and they do not have an outright prohibition of them, but they do have a cap. And so there's only a certain amount that they will allow, and then my understanding is it goes somewhat through like a conditional use or a special use permit process. So there are, I would say, also equally maybe just a handful that have an ordinance on the books. Otherwise, I think there's a lot of communities that are in our position that just, it's a newer industry, not much is really detected in their current codes about it. And the last thing I'll say about it, because I know there's other questions, is there is a movement by the state of Missouri to start regulating these. And there's been various House, Senate bills, but they've never have been able to come up with anything yet statewide to regulate, so.
Thanks. I don't often try to take over the board, so please just give me this one last question here. I see that we've got the Maplewood ordinance highlighted, and then you've got the draft legislation from Ellisville. If our land use attorney or city attorney put this together, was this just a new effort, or were you guys looking at a prohibitive ordinance from another community and drafting these?
So she was using other ordinances. She's actually drafted other ordinances as well for this type of language to have a clarification on the prohibition of one.
Do you know where?
I do not.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate your time. I really do.
Clayton prohibited short-term rentals as well. A couple other things, I would suggest that to the extent that
Is it Ladue
there are.
then? There's one of the bigger, the more affluent municipalities
Yeah,
is.
I'm not sure. To the extent that you would be opposed to the idea of prohibiting short-term rentals, I would just suggest that you make that position clear on the record and ensure that the minutes reflect that and that Ms. Kirkemeyer conveys that position of any commissioners to the Board of Aldermen. Another alternative would be to table the motion, and that would take priority over any motion to approve.
All right, thanks. Appreciate it.
Any other questions from commissioners? Mr. Nurnberger.
I have a couple of questions. One was, what about if somebody lives in the home and they just want to rent a room? They can't do that as currently, it would be,
That's correct. They would not be able to.
because to me, that's a little bit different than renting a house out. And then they're on their own, I guess. If somebody's living in there, they have the owner of the house being there when they're renting out the space. So I think that might be a issue that we might want to talk about a little bit more. And secondly, is there any reason that the somebody didn't step up and like want to move this forward as with their name on it, or is just coming back to us to make us do all the work? Is that what it really is?
I mean, again, they were all in agreement. What I remember from the Public Works Committee meeting is it was a direction from the four represented there. So as I said, they're within their right to go ahead and initiate any kind of text amendment, so that's why we're here. So I don't know about putting the name on it, and again, we've disclosed who those committee members are. So at this point, we're following the directive of how they wanted the proposed text amendments written.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Ms. Bilderbeck?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And forgive me, I have a mouth device, so I might lisp a little bit. I think in general that this is a good idea. I've had a lot of experience in 2 different homes in Brentwood dealing with rental properties. And short-term rentals would have a major safety concern in my view. I would be very concerned about short-term rentals happening in my neighborhood or in anyone else's, because I think it's riskier when you put it in that type of environment and it's not controlled like a hotel with all of the requisite requirements and cameras and security and all that kind of thing. So I actually think this is a good idea. I think that historically, there have been a few Board of Aldermen members who have brought specific proposals to us, but generally it comes, as I recall in the time I've been on the commission, usually from a committee, and they send it to us, and it's our position as Planning and Zoning Commission members because they want our input into the process and the language. I think it's great that our elected officials have chosen to use the experience of the members of this commission, kind of with a citywide view and with our breadth of experience to look at this. It's possible that there could be some, tweaks to it or something, we would want to go through the language and talk about it a little bit. I view there as being a difference, and I'm not sure in the question that Mr. Nurnberger had asked if we were talking about short-term room rentals in a house or long-term room rentals in a house. I would view someone renting a room in their house for a year being much different than someone renting, though not a huge fan of it, but somebody renting their home for short-term tenants, as more of the B&B style, maybe with or without the food part of that. I would have more concern about that. So I think that this is something that I appreciate them sending to us for our input, and that we should take some time and look at it. But generally, I'm in favor of the concept. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Shipley?
Per your suggestion, for the record, I'm not in favor of this. Share a little bit of my experience with Airbnb. As a marketing consultant for a window of about 2 years, I had a client, which is a startup company, came out of Arch Grants, came through the T-Rex incubator, raised $1 million. The co-founders were 17 and 22. And when we traveled to trade shows in Chicago or Portland or wherever exclusively, they would stay in Airbnbs and we would stay in Airbnbs. And so it was foreign to me. But the digital platforms that support these systems for short-term rentals take a lot of consideration into some of the concerns about matching up renters or guests with hosts. And there's ratings back and forth. If you're not a good guest, you get a low rating by the host. It makes it more difficult to be a guest somewhere else. So all those things are there. And I guess I bring, and from my experience, I've gone online and booked one and found one and stayed in one and across the board have had a good experience. The other thing to consider is, for example, WashU graduation, SLU graduation, a lot of these families come in from out of town. They're looking for these types of places to stay. And anecdotally, generally, they'll fly into the airport, they'll take an Uber to the Airbnb, and from there they want to pretty much, they don't cook and eat in the home. They go out and they spend money at restaurants and bars, and since they're in Ubers, they don't want to go too far. So I think it could be a good benefit to the local establishments, restaurants, bars, and other things that support this. So I would respectfully ask the public work. I think it is something that we should have a clear answer to when somebody calls and says, hey, I have a mother-in-law suite in my house and I want to start offering it up as an Airbnb. The city should be able to say definitively yes or no. So for that reason, I'm glad we're looking at it. But I would hope we would look at something a little bit more progressive, because I think we might be sort of on the wrong side of history. This reminds me a little bit of the St. Louis City Taxi Cab Commission fighting Uber, and then the backlash that came from all the tech companies and the startups and the millennials looking at the city of St. Louis as sort of behind the times because Uber is so popular. So that's where my perspective.
Mr. Nelson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Korkenmeier, can you tell me, I see in the proclamation it states that the city has had complaints, and I know you mentioned that earlier, that there had been at least some folks saying that this is a problem. Do you have any idea how many complaints? My question really is getting at is, are we looking for, is this a solution in search of a problem? How bad, how many complaints is the city getting?
I can tell you that we right now have folders or files started on 7 properties in Brentwood. And how those would come about, every one of them would have been a report by someone living close to those rentals.
Okay, so 7, and do we have, and
I don't know if
should know
that's
this.
all of them, but
Right,
you know.
yeah, is it, approximately how many residences do we have in Brentwood, I guess, what is the percentage that, the other question, I would say, this is something that I've also used in what I would say are more common tourist destinations, beaches, and traveling there. And I guess there's something on planning and zoning as a commissioner that I should know right away. Are we seen as that popular of a tourist destination? Is this something that is going to really get a lot of attention from folks wanting to come and stay in this area? Again, it's the 7 properties with quite a number of residences. Is this a really big problem? And are we saying no to something before there's something we can't do with other code enforcement, I guess?
Mr. Hart?
Hey, one question, is this, would Brentwood Forest govern this vis-a-vis their condominium bylaws? So I was thinking, that's a huge part of Brentwood, so maybe that's already eliminated with their bylaws, whatever it says in there. Does anyone know the answer to that? I would wonder.
I know the zoning code obviously applies to the whole area of Brentwood Forest, so I did not ask that of their manager, so.
Because their condo bylaws might say something specific to that, or it might be silent, or it might be kind of willy-nilly, but they might have something in there that prohibits it. And I don't know if any of the problem properties were located in Brentwood Forest, because I think that would be telling if any of these 7 were not. I don't know, that probably means that Brentwood Forest prohibits it, so might be worth considering.
We haven't been able to get very far in the actual location of one in Brentwood Forest, but I forgot which, we see 5 or 6 websites, but one of them will have units that are located in Brentwood Forest. That's all I know at this point.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Hanson?
Yeah, I would just speak to Mr. Shipley's point. I obviously would come out against this. I'm an owner of multiple rental properties. All of them are long-term in Brentwood, in St. Louis, and in the state of Missouri. Where and when I could have the option of being a short-term rental, I would find that to be a compelling reason to invest in properties. When we live in Brentwood. We live in the neighborhood of bungalows, of 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom houses. We live in a community where houses are often being torn down to increase space for people. Where and when there are properties that are available, bungalows for investors, and they could use those for business travelers who come in for the week and want to stay in a more home-like environment rather than one of our hotels. I see a benefit there. They spend their money there. They use foot traffic to go around Brentwood. As an attorney who travels, I also use Airbnb and VRBO when I go to Chicago, when I go to Philadelphia, or wherever else I go, and I find it to be superior. I think I don't want to make a mistake without giving this greater consideration as to whether Brentwood wants to put ourselves in the no short-term rental column before it's been sussed out. And I would liken this to the taxi commission versus Uber. And I think, it always finds a way. So I'd rather not do something rash. and I would oppose. And I don't, even though I've been on the board 5 years, I don't know how to table a motion. So if and when that time comes, I'll probably try to do that, and I may need procedural help doing it. Thank you.
Well, so to answer that point, you would simply make a motion to table.
Okay.
And there would be a roll call vote on that.
Okay, great.
And even if there was a motion to clarify my point earlier,
Mm-hmm.
under Robert's rules, if there was a motion to approve, you could then make a motion to table, and that would take priority. We
Okay.
would vote on yours before we got to the
Okay,
motion.
thank you.
Mr. Nurnberger.
I have one other question. Do we allow month-to-month leases in your apartment communities? Is only a term of less than a month that we're staying, or I'm just not clear what we allow for apartment buildings?
That would be really between the landlord and the tenant. I mean, there's nothing in any of our codes saying that all leases have to be 6-month leases or whatever. But again, because we don't even have the definition of a short-term rental, that already has some vagueness to it, I guess, if you will.
So right
we
now,
don't-
for the villas of Brentwood, if they have a month-to-month lease, they're in violation?
I don't know that they would have month-to-month, but
Every
again, they
lease
would.
becomes month to month after.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, no, not after a first term of the lease arrangement.
Yeah,
So,
but they
what-
can always offer a month-to-month lease if they choose
Yeah,
to.
and I understand leases can be broken. You could have somebody in there and then find out the lease is broken as well. But then that's really when the occupancy permit
Right.
program, kicks in.
So every time somebody turns over a unit, they have to get an occupancy permit for
We
the
get
new
it
tenant?
inspected,
Yeah.
so it's gonna be the owner's responsibility to get the inspection done, and we only address life safety issues, but
But
then the
it doesn't
inspection
go
has
for
to
a term of a
pass.
year for the occupancy permit, or is that, every time somebody turns over, they have to get
So
a
it's
new?
good for 1 year. So
Okay.
if you would have a situation where you'd have somebody that would have to move out in 3 months, break their lease or whatever, but then then it's really, the onus is still on the new tenant to come into building department and get a certificate of occupancy. We would look up the inspection, realize that it had passed inspection, but then they're still obligated to get,
Okay.
or otherwise
I'm
they're in
just- I guess
violation
I'm
of
saying
that
there's
section
a
of the code.
process that they would have to go through
Mm-hmm.
when they turn over and that sort of thing, so that's fine. Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Sure.
Any further comments from commissioners? Ms. Hanson?
Well, I'm ready to make a motion.
Yeah.
I'd just like to make a motion to table the petition before us for text amendments to Chapter 400 zoning code with respect to short-term rentals.
Second.
And Ms. Hanson, is that motion designed to inform the Public Works Committee that there are concerns with this direction on the part of the Planning and Zoning Commission and wishing staff to further research the issue?
Yes, Mr. Daming, and you articulated that very well. Thank you.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on the motion to table? Any member of the audience like to address the commission on this issue? Yes, Ms. Smith.
So I live on Harrison, and we have 2 Airbnbs operating in close proximity to me. And I am very aware that they're very popular and that people are making a lot of money off of them. I'm also aware of the technology that's behind them and the ratings. I do think that sometimes the technology gets out ahead of society's ability to absorb the impact. And so I do think that some communities are looking at these a lot more closer, and I'm not so sure that they'll be embraced. I am fully supportive of people renting out properties when you are in like a tourist attraction, like Michigan. You can rent, homes for the summer, homes for a month. But it's very difficult to be in a community when you have a high percentage of properties that are rental. When people rent a home for a year when somebody owns a bungalow and rents it out to a renter for a year, every time that home changes over with a renter, there is an inspection. When the utilities change, it's supposed to happen. It doesn't always happen because sometimes people pass renters through there without notifying. But they're supposed to get an occupancy. So the home gets inspected. That's not happening with the short-term rentals. So we don't really have, I don't think, processes in place to ensure that the value of our homes are maintained with these Airbnbs. When I think of zoning in a community, and from what I have learned, what I've seen, and from what I've witnessed in other cities, the zoning is to inform the kind of type of activity you want to put in certain, how you want to use the land in certain areas. And when I think of owning a home, it's a place, it's a home. It's not something where people are supposed to be making money. So I even have problems with people that have long-term rentals of bungalows. I understand that people do it. It's not something that I'm supportive of. When you compare it, Airbnb to Uber, they're two different things. A car is very, very different than a home. That's someplace where people live. That's where people in my neighborhood, even though it's a bungalow neighborhood, people do have families in there. We know each other. There is so much traffic going in and out of these homes. They do not observe our ordinances as far as occupancy rates. There's hordes of people in the one home. They don't observe the parking. There's been some trash. We haven't had noise issues yet. And one of the homes rents out the whole home, and another one rents out a room. And that's even problematic. I mean, the neighbors all are talking like, these strangers are going in and out of these homes. We don't even know who they are. So I think we really have to think very close about it. I mean, I bought a home in a community. I did not buy a home in a hotel. And right now, my neighborhood feels like it's a hotel. Let's see here. The other point I might make is we always come out with fancy names for things. You know, in the 60s, they were called bell-bottom jeans. Now they're called bootleg. What Airbnbs really are is kind of an updated, glorified boarding house. And I don't know if you've ever studied a housing where you have a lot of boarding houses in a community. It, over time, tends to pull them down. The homes are not as well maintained. I can already see it in one of the homes across the street. I mean, it's just with the activity that's going on in and out of there. The individuals that moved in on Saturday moved a horde of stuff in there. I have no idea what they're doing in there. They've moved a horde of stuff in there. 2 of the cars haven't moved for 2 days. So I don't know what they're doing in there, but I don't know that it's a home. It's not a home. They're not using it as a home. So I guess that's all I'm going to say right now. I really didn't prepare any big thoughts or anything very organized, but I just don't know if it's appropriate to be mixing business activity in an area of the city that you have designated for residential properties. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Smith. Very briefly, we got a motion on the table. It really should have just limited to the motion, but if you've got something pertinent to the motion, go ahead.
Well, I absolutely do, and in fact, I wanted to say something before she made the motion. You looked at me when I had my hand up and looked at her, and that's fine. But yes, absolutely. I think those are great points, and I've had some problems with a house next door to me before it wasn't a rental, which included a lot of drug activity. I also would add that the Uber Tax Commission battle, I'm very familiar with that. And that really has to do with competition and not wanting competition and a battle over dollars. And these are residential neighborhoods, so I don't really look as a battle over dollars other than maybe protecting the property values of the actual homeowners around there. It's only a problem, not a problem for you if you're not one of the neighbors that lives around the 7 properties that they've complained about. So, you know, those people are just as important, and there but for the grace of God go I, as they say, not to bring religion into it just as a saying. So I would have wanted to take this to our subcommittee meeting and have a discussion about it rather than table it, to spend some thoughtful time with it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, that's essentially the function of a motion to table, is to table for further evaluation and discussion.
No, it's not. I mean, it effectively tables it. It doesn't
No.
mean we're going to be continuing to talk about it. It just means, otherwise, we would have had a recommendation to send it to subcommittee.
All
That's
in-
how we send it to subcommittee, not
All-
by tabling it.
It's incorrect.
I
A
just-
motion to table under Robert's Rules of Order simply means that the matter is tabled from further discussion this evening.
Will it be on our site plan committee agenda?
I would have no problem with making it part of the site plan. It'd be up to Lisa, but if you want to direct Lisa to put it on the site plan agenda, that's fine.
And then how do we bring it back up off the table later to discuss it at a meeting?
Have it on the agenda.
Okay. Well, I'd like to see it on the subcommittee agenda, please, then.
Further discussion on the motion to table. Okay, so there's a motion to table this matter from further discussion tonight. So the yes would be to no longer have any discussion on this matter tonight. And a no would be to continue discussion tonight. Roll call, please.
Sherry Bilderbeck,
No.
Michael Damon,
Yes.
Mark Pavazza,
Yes.
Jennifer Hansen,
Yes.
Michael Hart,
Yes.
Rebecca Jacobs,
Yes.
Clint Lewis,
Yes.
Paul Moran,
Yeah.
Hart Nelson,
Yes.
John Nuremberg is yes. Lisa Sherling,
Yes.
Tom Shipley.
Yes.
Motion passes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so Ms. Kirkemeyer, the motion did request that you inform the Public Works Committee of at least the desire to have further discussion on this matter. So if you could evaluate that and some other alternatives, and we can put it on a future meeting agenda.
Okay.
All right, Aldermanic report. I see no alderman. City planners report. I think there's a couple brief things you wanted to talk about with the comprehensive plan.
Yes, I appreciate everyone's time and cooperation, getting any kind of individual comments that you had back to me by the end of last year. So I was able to consolidate everyone's comments, and I forwarded them to Housel and Levine. And they are working on the amendments to all the chapters except Chapter 5 sub-area, Chapter 6 residential plan, and all the exhibits will still invariably get changed with other recommendations to still look at those two chapters. I also should probably, I should let you know that I also asked Andy Frankie with Planning Design Studios to review the comp plan as well, to see if he had any comments. He had some helpful comments. Nothing that really changed too much the, positions on anything, but just again, so that was helpful. So that has been turned in. The consultants are working on the final revisions to those parts of the plan. But there still were other comments that were made by email to the commission, as well as I also had a few things that I still think that we need to have just a decision made. And one of them that we talked about at the last meeting was still the land use boundaries for South Brentwood Boulevard. And just again, a glance again at the sub-area plan for Brentwood Boulevard and how those two things relate. So with that, I've got 3 things to cover. So hopefully we can just kind of get right into it. And I know these maps are sort of poor here, so I apologize for that. But at the last meeting, it was expressed, and I understood it when someone said, you're talking about maybe extending either the corridor commercial or the mixed-use land use designation boundaries on South Brentwood Boulevard. How do we know what that really means? Just pushing the line out on this map that we had from Housel and Levine, it was kind of hard to make that judgment, if you will. So one of the other things that was also asked, if we could then look at if the expansion of the boundaries included several additional homes, were those homes either renter occupied or owner occupied? So we got the information back from Mohit in terms of this plan, and I believe everybody saw. And earlier we had just I had kind of just said, well, maybe about 400 feet wide or 400 feet deep from South Brentwood Boulevard. Let's look at what falls into that line. And so Mohit went ahead and put this map together, this aerial with these boundaries. I hope everybody's had a chance to review that. So 400 is as absolutely wide as I could ever see it go. And again, that doesn't mean that all 400 feet within that area would be developed, but you definitely should be able to reserve 50 feet, so for a very good, stable, sturdy buffer between commercial and mixed use or residential. And so then he also supplied on this aerial map then a blue line that represented thinking about expansion of the land use boundaries, but not a clear 400 feet, and looking at a few other things in terms of just neighborhood boundaries and characteristics and things like that, what might work in Brentwood's case. So that's what the red and the blue lines are in this map. So anyway, in order to kind of comply with just getting the owner, renter, occupied information together and seeing what the implications of this would be, I'll kind of take you through this handout here that we have here on map A. So this is just a blown-up scale of the land use map that was provided by House and Levine. So I have a note on here that overall, the land uses are acceptable. We're only talking really about, do we want to expand that boundary out? So there's four actually, I guess, land use categories that are represented. The red color means corridor commercial. The teal is a public or semi-public land use. The brown is mixed use, and the brown stripe was mixed-use expansion. So when I've had several talks with House and Levine, they did agree that probably we were never going to really change the look of Brentwood Boulevard if we didn't consider some expansion of that boundary. So that's what the white and brown stripes mean. So then, if you go to the second map, I went back to our zoning map. And so now, again, this is a zoning map. So what's in teal here is actually the zoning of the property. It's not land use, but everything in the teal color is zone plan development. So everything that's zone plan development in the blue areas would be a pretty much of a mirror image of what so far we have on this land use map provided by House and Levine. The green that goes out further would be taking it closer to a point maybe about 350 feet in depth, and would be areas that I would say could possibly still be expanded even further. So the land use categories would stay the same as suggested on here, but I wanted you to be able to get that information to see again, owner, rental, and then also how many lots are we talking about? Does that mean if we expand the boundary, are we talking about 2 more residential properties or what have you? So I hope that explanation was a little bit clear. And so I guess what I would say, how we would start this, is if you think the boundaries themselves need to stay right where they are, then the only discussion that I would really entertain still is just to use this map on the first page. And there are just slight modifications I would make to the land use categories, and we can go through that. Otherwise, the point of discussion tonight is to look at this map and see if you want to widen any more the mixed land use along Brentwood Boulevard.
Well, I guess the question is, what was the recommendation of the experts at House Hill Levine to accomplish the development that they're envisioning?
So, again, if you take the brown and white striped areas out, that was what their first plan was, their first map, which was given back in August or September. And then when we started to have these discussions, their recommendations were to add what is still brown and white. But then even after we had the public hearing at the last meeting, they still felt that this was sufficient. So that's what they feel. And they just said that it's worked in other areas in terms of not having necessarily kind of a rule of thumb to follow. And sometimes 150 feet of depth would work great for some projects. But my whole contention is, and I get that, but I guess my contention still is that if we don't look at designating some of this for future land use, what they had initially looked pretty much like our zoning map, the way our zoning map looks right now. So I don't think we're going to have the basis when people would come in and want to assemble properties and have a development proposal and request for rezoning. I don't think we're going to have that basis to say, yeah, this should be zoned from single family to mixed use. So that's what I'm trying to do here. So
So are there two specific, they recommend 400 feet, is that correct?
no, they would not recommend any more expansion of the boundaries.
Okay.
They
So-
would say, so they would go back to this one and say that this is what they're recommending.
So the options are keep it as the status quo or expand it to what?
Or to the second page and just look at expanding the boundaries, and what I did was actually follow parcel lines. So everything even with that includes the green, would be my recommendation to expand the land use boundaries. And then if this map shows that it's mixed use, this would just be an expansion of the mixed use land use boundary.
So the second page,
Right,
that second page is your recommendation?
right. That would show, so to put some perspective, I guess, to it, this map is scaled. This is a 1 inch equals 300 feet scale. So if you would look down to like where the Brentwood Recreation Complex is, what the city owns there is about 380 feet deep. So again, there is no magic to necessarily state 400 or even 350. And I agree, you do have to look how the property is being used and things like that. But overall, I still think that the land use boundaries for mixed use should be wider than what the consultant is recommending.
Yeah, I agree with that. Lot depth has always been an issue raised by developers looking at or considering.
So it doesn't
Brentwood
mean
Boulevard.
that, you know, anybody that falls in this expanded boundary, it doesn't mean that they have to sell their homes. It doesn't mean that their homes are going to be rezoned. I actually looked when I went through and either indicated it was owner occupied or rental occupied. I made absolutely sure that every single family home was still under the tax code or the tax land use code for single family. So it's not going to change your taxes. And then I thought what was kind of interesting when I did this exercise is there's actually a few single-family homes that are already zone plan development out there that are owner-occupied. And then even with the small expansion that the consultant was recommending, there's, again, already owner-occupied homes there that seem like they've been kept up. So anyway, that's just...
Okay, so the options for the commission and for the CPAC are whether to maintain the current zoning as regards lot depth along Brentwood Boulevard or expand it along the lines of that suggested by Ms. Kirkemeyer on page 2. Or
The land
possibly-
use designation, not the zoning, but the
Or
land use.
possibly something else. All right, open it up to the commission. Mr. Shipley.
For the record, I would support the recommendation on the red line for the 400 feet. A couple of things. As I took a note when the quote was, "You'll never change the look of Brentwood Boulevard without expanding the boundary." And as the chairman just brought up, it's an issue that comes up over and over with developers. These lots are too shallow for commercial development. If we go back to the early stages, the very first set of community meetings for community input, which took place in the Brentwood Community Center, which is 380 feet back from Brentwood Boulevard, the different neighbors, and through those discussions, there was some consistency in what the top issues were. There was the Manchester Road and the flooding, which I think the mayor and the Board of Aldermen are working hard to remedy somehow. There was the lack of pedestrian and walking trails and that, and I think that's part of the comprehensive plan, which was good. And it was predominant that, hey, Brentwood Boulevard from Manchester Road all the way almost to the highway, or at least up to the promenade development, looks run down and dingy, and it's not a high-quality commercial district. And developers, as the chairman mentioned, said the lots are too narrow. I talked to a couple of owners of some of those rundown, dingy commercial buildings and said, how come you're not improving these buildings? And it's anecdotal, but he said, it's because these lots aren't deep enough for a modern commercial development. So the other point that I'd make is, if we keep the status quo, we can't really expect those buildings, or anybody to invest in those buildings with shallow depth lots, because it's not how modern commercial development, commercial buildings are designed and built.
Ms. Bilderbeck?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I sent an email to the commission in response to Lisa's request for comments on the comprehensive plan, and one of the things that it discussed was the maps. In the email that the consultants had sent us, they sent us this map, the one with the blue and red polygons is what they called it. The red line, I like to call it lines instead of polygons, but the red lines and the blue lines, and they actually said the blue lines would work. I believe the red lines go too far into the residential neighborhoods, and I have several thoughts as to why I believe that to be the case. I think the blue represents a good compromise. I would actually like to stick with the changes that are on this map A. I would prefer this, and I'll tell you why. So that's why I'm saying the blue is a good compromise. I would have concern with the proposal that was outlined by our planning and zoning director on the second page after map A. So a lot of things have changed in Brentwood. We have a great deal of commercial development. We've been really blessed. It's been very exciting. We have a lot of transformation that's going to take place in the Hanley Industrial Court, and we'll have a lot of more growth and development. We have some giant commercial corridors. And one of the things that I like best about the city of Brentwood is that Brentwood is our main street, and even though some of the buildings are underutilized or are not perfect, I think that by creating a large swath, it will allow for more of the large box retailers, which I don't think is the kind of development that's appropriate along Brentwood Boulevard backing up to our residential properties. And I think it changes dramatically the character of the neighborhood. It's already bad enough what, the highways folks have done relative to the lanes on Brentwood Boulevard since the 40 expansion. That was unfortunate. So I think this will take that and make that a larger problem. So I'm thinking something that would be a compromise that the consultants say would work, this blue line that is on this map would better balance that. The other thing is when we look at the owners and the residential, or the owners and the rental properties, the thing that's going to happen is this. If you take rental properties away, and a lot of those are owner occupied that we're talking about having as future land use, not being residential anymore, even though it wouldn't be rezoned yet. But by essentially taking those properties away in the future land use planning, not only are you removing many owner occupied homes, even if you say, well, some of them are rentals, what's going to happen is that then when you widen the commercial corridor, the homes next to it are going to go rental, because that's what happens along every commercial corridor. When you have residential that's alongside of it, it flips essentially to more of a multifamily situation or a rental situation, because the property values will decline and the owners will sell the homes to move somewhere else. And you can see that happening all along every commercial corridor. So when you widen the commercial corridor, then you don't get rid of rental properties, you just push them back further into the neighborhoods. When you look at a wider view of this and kind of look at, even on this map A, what our residential areas are compared to what the commercial are, when you start taking out much larger chunks of it, you're left with a lot less residential. And one of the things that we wanted to do was encourage folks to move into the area, and we have a breadth of commercial shopping available and all that kind of thing. So I think by having a compromise, which again I said I would rather have this over here, but by going to the blue polygon, I think it balances those interests. And as I recall, Ms. Smith commented at our last meeting that if you were to ask people what they want to see to happen along Brentwood Boulevard, they'd be like, oh yeah, we want it to be redeveloped, we want this, we want that. But if you ask them if it was going to encroach this many houses into the neighborhood, then they might have a different opinion if you spelled it out that way. So I would urge us to consider going with the blue lines at a minimum, and if not, this map A. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So far, I haven't heard much of an issue with what the proposed zoning to is. Rather, it's the issue so far has been zoning from residential and how far we want to take the elimination of these residential zones. So looking at your map B, your second map here, how does that correspond to the blue line or the red line? It's difficult to tell.
So the area in the teal and the blue would be a pretty close representation of the blue line on this map. And then the added green areas would be more representative of the red boundary on here, but not quite 400 feet. So it'd be less than 400 feet. So, and
Okay.
again, we're only talking land use, we're not talking about zoning. So this, unfortunately, this map, you can't tell either exactly how many houses or, which ones and so forth. But, that's why, I kind of use this one so you could get an idea of the addresses and the houses and so forth, so.
Okay. Well, but you're talking about zoning here on second, I mean, UD, PD, those are
So,
zones.
so again, I had to use the zoning map as an exhibit, but we're not talking about zoning, we're still talking about land use. So everything again on the zoning map exhibit, everything in the blue is pretty much a mirrored image of everything that is anything but residential along the corridor. The green additions would be widening those land use categories.
All right.
This is not where.
Yeah, it's not as clear as mud. All right, Mr. Moran?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Happy New Year. So there's a bit of a dissonance in my mind, right, which is not unusual, but our high-priced Chicago consultants say you need 400 feet, here's your red line. We say, that's going to take out some houses, and they say, well, blue line will work. What is it? What do we need? What's their recommendation, and how fungible is it going to be? Because that looks to be like roughly a third of some of the reserved area they've just given up. They said that we needed 400 feet. You know what 250 will do you, Brentwood? Are we going to be left caught in between two stools, if you have the expression over here, where it's neither, we end up taking out houses, but it's not really suitable for commercial developments either? Is a compromise like a bad idea? I wish Mohit was here right now to ask him that question.
We need to get some more clarification from him. I agree with you, Mr. Mummy. That's why we hired these guys and paid them six figures. And that's why Brentwood Boulevard was a sub-area. They were tasked with identifying what needed to be done to,
Okay, so again, he had remarked that the blue line would be acceptable, so that is their recommendation.
He said it would work.
So what I would suggest then, and we still can have them come and talk with the group again if you'd want, but I think what we need to do then is go from this blue line on the map and to be able to put it on a parcel map,
Yes.
so that you still can see which homes, which addresses we're talking about. That's the disconnect with this map, because again, this is too vague. You
Right.
can't tell what you're giving up, if I'll use that expression. And then we go to this one, and it's still too vague. You
Right.
can't tell what you're giving up. So the only parcel map we have to work with, because we don't have GIS, is the zoning map. So that's why we try to, transfer that information on. Thank you. Okay, overlay, yes.
okay, good.
So-
Mr. Favazza?
I actually live in this area, so,
In the blue area or the red area?
well, both, actually. It would be, I'd be the first house in the blue area.
Which street?
I'm on Bridgeport.
Thank you.
If you look on Bridgeport, on the east side, goes OORO, on that last O there. So, I recognize that for the future of Brentwood, that Brentwood Boulevard would definitely have to be widened. I'm not naive to that fact. I think going out to the red line, though, would just be too much, especially when you have kids that are walking to school and crossing Brentwood Boulevard. Now you're asking them to walk through basically two commercial districts, where now it's, 50 feet on each side of the boulevard, I think, roughly, maybe more than that, from my street at least. Cross Brentwood, walk past a small commercial building, and then you're back in the residential, walking to school. Then you'd be asking kids, I know that wouldn't be my kids, this is gonna take a long time to develop, but the future kids, to basically be walking through parking lots of commercial buildings, higher traffic to get to school, unless something happens with our facilities, school facilities, which I know is being talked about. But just something for people to think about. But I would be, the blue line would be as far as I'd want development to go.
Okay. Any further discussion? Recognizing it looks like we're going to probably need to have a site plan subcommittee meeting. We can take this issue up, hopefully with some clarification as to what the different options are, and then we can take up some of these other issues that you've identified, and we can take up the short-term rental issue as well,
Which Joanne abandoned.
if we have research done.
So
before
for that meeting then, we would like to ask the consultant to provide a new map with the blue line, but it has to be on a parcel map.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that
and
way we know what,
We would just ask that Mohit give this a little more thought. This is a significant issue. Brentwood Boulevard is a significant sub-area that we've asked them to take extra care with their analysis on, and if he thinks that blue is sufficient, then we need to know why. And if he thinks that what the industry standard is, we'd like to know that, and just more, we need to be more informed in our decision, and hopefully have less than 5 different maps to look at, because I'm confused. All right, any further discussion on this, knowing that we have to have a subcommittee meeting?
Yeah, I want to
Ms.
say this
Stolberg?
for the record, Mr. Chairman. So I sent in comments that were requested, I mentioned before, and we discussed one of them, which was the map comments. So you all have a copy at your desk, and it's a matter of public record. I had also included an attachment that had a really rough markup of 2 pages of the draft comprehensive plan. And these 2 areas were the only things that I had real concerns with about the plan. I think the plan is awesome, except for these areas. I think that they can be improved to address the competing goals of the residents of the city of Brentwood. So the overall theme that I'll provide, and I'll let my email for now, and then the subcommittee meeting will discuss it more, speak for itself. But the overall theme is that there's a lot of duplicative language in the 2 pages on the residential land use objectives. And there's multiple layers of government and non-government being set up to do things that could be more centralized and streamlined, also in order to balance different interests and goals that are somewhat paradoxical to each other for the city of Brentwood. And one of the big themes with that is that relative to infill and addition, proposed regulations or requirements, I believe that that should be the Planning and Zoning Commission that should be charged with writing those. It was actually something that we had looked at doing on the commission, and I had actually drafted some before we even had an architectural review board. Some of the things that people have concern with, for example, percent brick requirements and things like that, I believe there's a way to do that and write that would apply to all zoning districts, but yet allow that to be flexible, that would fit in with each zoning district. So I can explain more about that at the subcommittee meeting. It's a really pretty artful concept. So the bottom line is that the Planning and Zoning Commission has generally been charged with these types of things. We have a wide geographic spread in the community, and we have a wide background of interest that I think are really reflective of a robust discussion. In addition to that, we televise our meetings. They go onto YouTube, and we have great discussions at site plan, at public hearings, at our meetings, where citizen engagement could continue when actual proposed regulations are out there. So with that said, I'll let my written comments stand as I've submitted them, and I would ask that if we could please discuss this at site plan as well.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Could I add?
Yeah, Mr. Shipley?
Just a point of clarification. So, you guys are probably going to get tired of me referencing the UMSL class that I took in November and December. So, it was the fundamentals of planning and zoning, and I learned a lot from it. It was a bit painful, 3 hours every Thursday for 7 weeks. But a few things that jumped out, and they talked a lot about this ex parte communication. And I'm not an attorney, so I might even be saying it incorrectly, but the meat of that is that all of these discussions are on YouTube, minutes are taken, this is all in a public forum. And they were specific about email threads among commissioners talking about issues. And as I recall at the meeting, the last meeting, I'm not sure if it made it to the minutes, but it was agreed that all of us would send our comments directly to Ms. Kirkenmeyer, and then she would summarize those and distribute those, and those were due by December 22nd, I think. So I took my best shot at championing my pet cause, which is for more trails and more walkable spaces in Brentwood, and that made its way in. But I'm personally uncomfortable, and I did send a note back to Sherry that I didn't read that email really because of that ex parte communication. And I just, if that is truly the case, we should stick by that as a...
Kirkmeyer, would you mind checking with the city attorney on that issue?
Thank you.
Ms. Bilderbeck?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I didn't make the right before Christmas Friday deadline for my comments. As you know, I'm a crime victim. I've been having a rough time. I was actually raped on Labor Day, so I sent my apologies for the delay in getting that in. As you can imagine, Christmas was a very rough time for me. So I sent my comments in a week late. I didn't know if they would have a chance to be incorporated or not. I did a reply to all to give everyone my comments. I've brought my comments here tonight. I was asking the city to make the photocopies for me. I thought that was reasonable. So, you know, I don't have a problem with any member of the Planning and Zoning Commission getting an email from anyone because they're public comments on a public document, and we should be able to receive them. We don't routinely have great conversations about, or long conversations about it. Karen Smith sent in her comments. I happen to agree with them when I sent in my comments. She had a clarification on it. Every single one of those emails is included here for the record and is public record, available for anybody in the city of Brentwood that wants a copy. And frankly, if anybody wants to email me, they can get it from me directly, or they can get it from the city. So this is not something that we do all the time, and since the deadline was brought up, I just wanted to make it clear that even though mine is dated a week after the set deadline, there were extenuating circumstances for which I apologized in my email.
I don't think Mr. Shipley was saying you did anything wrong. He was just looking for some clarification. I don't know. So, Ms. Kirkemeyer, can you check with the city attorney on that? Let's just,
Yes, I will.
let's just figure out if there's an issue there. Okay, so, suggestion for the commission. We have a site plan meeting on the 31st, and we take up some remaining stray issues, including this one on the comp plan, and then we take up the short-term rental if you've been able to get some more direct. And it may be that you approach the Public Works Committee with the thoughts, and the fact is there's some resistance at least, maybe, and just find out how they would propose that we move forward.
What I would plan to do then for the 31st would be to do more research, and I don't know, again, if you have copies of all the research or summaries of that to that point, but it would be hard to keep writing text amendments when there's not a direction going one way. So I kind of think the meeting on the 31st will be our first opportunity to just kind of dive into the discussion is how I see it, you know, and then look at what alternatives that there could be for short-term rentals, prohibition, a cap on the number, you know, that kind of thing. I think we'll have to kind
The
of go from there.
regulation, do you require each tenant,
Right,
each
so
Airbnb tenant to get an occupancy permit?
I just didn't want anybody to think I was gonna take another,
Yeah.
you know, attempt at this and just bring back more text amendments, because I think we.
No.
you know,
Oh, you shouldn't have to do
And
that.
so,
And it may be that Public Works doesn't want us to further pursue the issue. So just check with them, and if it's ripe, then we can take it up on the 31st. That
Mr.
sound good to everybody else?
Mr.
Ms.
Chairman,
Hanson?
may I make my monthly plea that the site plan committee start at 7 PM?
So, Ms. Hanson, if we take up our,
I'll show up.
what time can you show up? What time can you be there?
7.
Seven.
Same for me.
All right. Do you want to be there for the comp plan discussion? Because we could take that up first, and then,
You know, if it starts at 7, I'll be there for all of it. If it doesn't start at 7, I'd prefer that we hold off on the short-term rental issue until 7.
fair enough. How about 6:30 then on the, because I know this was the
6:30 on
short-term
what?
rental was an issue for you. So
Right.
the 31st, and we can take up the comp plan issues at 6:30, and then we'll wait until 7 o'clock. to
I
take up the
appreciate that.
short-term
Thank you
rental.
very much.
Is that okay with the commission?
Any one of these days is better.
All right.
can I just ask a question? So, there is a schedule every year that gets printed out for 2018 meeting dates. So even the site plan, is already a scheduled meeting. So are we wanting to just overall change the time of the site plan meeting so we could, because it's on the community calendar. So, you know, I just didn't know if
Yeah.
we were gonna keep moving it depending upon what the schedule is, but I think that's gonna get,
No, I don't think so. This was an issue that we have a commissioner that has a particular interest in that. She can't be there until 7 o'clock.
so I'm gonna
Appreciate that.
post it
Thank
for
you.
6:30, and I'm gonna make sure that the comp plan item is the first item, followed by the short-term rental.
Correct.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, can everybody make the 31st? Okay, great. Great, 6:30. We're starting late, so have some caffeine for everybody. It's gonna be a late
Can you
night.
send out a reminder, please?
Do it during the day.
A calendar invite?
Yeah.
Okay, rationale, I think it would be important for you to pass on that the commission does have concerns about the prohibition. Why don't we take a straw poll, if you could pass on the straw poll, a non-binding straw poll. Who would be in favor, as we sit here tonight, you can change your mind, who is in favor of prohibiting short-term rentals in Brentwood? Okay, I would be as well, so, but obviously you can pass on to Public Works if there's a majority of the commission that is not in favor of a total prohibition at this point. Okay, good, well, that's good to know. You guys are progressive. All right, rationale, Ms. Kirkmeyer can handle. Any other business this evening?
I just have one item I just want to mention. So with your packets, we sent out the information about the disclosure report again. So this year, it should be a lot easier to understand how it needs to be filled out and what time period. So we are capturing your report period from January 1st to December 31st, 2017. And these forms are due back to us May 1st. So, and please, if you would, because last year when we got a lot of farms returned, and we're not gonna be writing on your farms, but just make sure that, especially on the Missouri Ethics one, you do write in your report period. So again, you're gonna be doing your report for January 1st, 2017 to December 31st, 2017. If you have any questions, just let me know. Turn it back in as soon as possible, we appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Ms. Kirkmeyer. Any further discussion? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Nurnberger?
That makes sense.
Second by Ms. Bilderback, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, stand adjourned.